Okay, welcome to Mountaineer Farm Talk. Um, I'm your host today, JJ Barrett from Wood County, WVU Extension Service, and my co-host is Brandy Brabham from Roane County. Brandy, how are you doing this morning?
Doing good. Just had a slow drive into work. First snow of the season for us up here in Roane County.
Well, good. A happy new year to everyone. Um, Once again, Mountaineer Farm Talk is a weekly podcast featuring interviews with Extension Service professionals and other agriculture experts about timely topics important to West Virginia agriculture. Our mission is simple to provide educational and research based information to people all across the Mountain State. And today we're going to be talking about goals for the farm for 2022 in the new year. And we have two special guests. We have Stan Moore from Michigan State Extension. Stan, how are you doing this morning?
Doing great. Good to see you, JJ.
Good. And of course, we have the famous Brian Wickline. He's our A&R agent from Monroe County. Brian, how are you doing this morning?
Good morning, JJ. How are you?
Oh, I'm just wonderful. It's 15 degrees, so
Yes, it is.
it's one of those tough mornings, but it's wintertime, so um, we wanted starting the new year out of course, maybe we're going to hit some topics today that sometimes that we don't want to talk about, in this cold weather. We'll be spending more time in the office if you have a farm business, and we're talking about goals, financial goals, and um, things about financial goals for the farm business. So I want to start with Stan. Can you just tell us a little about you are the farm business management educator for Michigan State Extension. Tell us a little about yourself and your background.
Great. Yep. I've been with Extension for about 32 years now. Most of that time has been up in northern Michigan. So I work just northeast of Traverse City. For folks that are looking at the map, if you're looking at the screen today to the YouTube video, when you see the recording, Michiganders all carry their map with them, and I'm up here kind of on that ring finger, if you will. Just east side of Grand Traverse Bay, so we have kind of a unique climate up here. But I cover about 23 counties actually across northern Michigan up into the eastern UP, and there's 6 of us across the state that do farm business management.
Okay, and Brian, we know that you are the ag agent down there in Monroe County, but talk a little bit about the Trans4 program that you have for our beef producers.
Well, the Trans4 was derived from Dr. Trainell at Iowa State, and we worked with Larry to develop that from a beef production standpoint. And of course, we do have the dairy trans that we use on occasion, but we're down to 33 dairy farms in the state of West Virginia. So obviously, that's not used as much as what the beef program is. But basically, what that is it's a profitability program that has benchmarks in it, and it's a tool that we could also use for budgeting as well. Pretty handy little spreadsheet that's not real in depth as some of the other programs, and is time consuming as filling out, but basically just a couple 2 or 3 hours we can usually knock an analysis out with that. Just this week we were able to get I got a copy of a sheep trans. Of course, the small ruminant industry is really looking really good here this past year financially in in our well, I guess basically throughout the whole country. But basically, what this small ruminant program is very similar to the beef and the sheep, our beef and the dairy. But we're happy to have access to that now, so we can work with our small ruminant producers on that.
Good. That sounds like we're making a lot of progress there, Brian. I want to start out with maybe why is it important to have goals for the farm business? Maybe I'll start with Stan, and as a second part to that question, why is it sometimes that our producers maybe want to put some of those financial things on the back burner? Start with Stan.
Yeah, because production's more fun, right? We want to
Right.
be out with the cows or riding on the tractor. I grew up a farm boy, Southwest Michigan, so I totally understand that. Finances and labor management are, we know they're extremely important on farms, but we have a hard time, putting significant time towards those, but extremely important. And why is it important to have goals? Because, how do we know that we've achieved something on the farm? And how do we know that we've achieved it if we don't do those in a way that we can kind of lay those out, have them measurable, um, and say, yeah, I'm making progress on this. How am I comparing to other farms? Am I making progress in this business? It's bringing in that business aspect to our farm. Certainly, we enjoy farming, and that's you know extremely important. But if we want to enjoy it for the long term, it's got to be profitable as well.
Brian, the same question to you.
Well, JJ, you mentioned earlier when you started this talk, you mentioned the term farm business, and there's so many times that we don't consider farming a business. I and to be honest, I really didn't until we went into the dairy business. I mean, yeah, we look at the end of the year, see how we did from a beef cattle perspective, but when we went into the dairy business is when we really had to get serious about managing finances. And I think as you get older, I don't know if there's a certain level of maturity. For me, there was maybe a certain level of maturity that you had to get serious about what you were doing finally. That's one thing we don't ingrain in our young people is the importance of profitability. And we've got to make some changes there. We've got to get our young folks involved early in terms of understanding profitability and what it means. And I mean, even from a land grant system standpoint, we've got production ag kids that are coming back to the farm, and they're taking maybe one farm business class, and really that needs to be emphasized much more than what we're doing right now. So
I just wanted to jump in here a little bit, JJ, and just talk about in West Virginia, we have the situation where we don't have a lot of farm families that are solely just farming as a business. They've got a part-time farm and a full-time job, and actually they've got 2 full-time jobs, and they look at their work as supplementing their farm business, and they don't separate those financials, and it just makes it hard for them to see if they're really making profits and or losing money. And I'm hoping that Stan's going to give us some good ideas and tips on how to make that happen for our farm families in West Virginia.
Yep, I agree. And maybe Stan can throw the 2 cents in, because I'm all the time always asking Larry, how do we get people to understand the importance of being profitable and not using agriculture as a tax write-off? And sometimes you feel like you're beating your head against the wall, trying to get folks to understand the importance of profitability. So.
Well, although your lender may not be as worried about that, day one, they're looking at your equity position oftentimes and your cash flow, but ultimately they are interested in it. So I guess that's one of the ways, Brian, is eventually your lender is going to say, hey, you've burned a lot of equity over the years. What are you doing to become more profitable? So I should, as Brian had mentioned, some of the software that he used, I should mention that at MSU, we use a couple of programs just to give some context. So we're using principally PC Mars out of Iowa for our record keeping, although we've added QuickBooks now to software that we support. And then we do all of our analysis through FinPack, which is, I'm sure, familiar to a lot of you guys. So, and that's what we use to go out and do those farm financial analysis with businesses. So as I talk about some of those numbers today and what areas we look at, that's kind of the context that I'm coming from, is using those 2 programs. So we really emphasize kind of the big 3 with farms. We talk about net farm income or profitability, as Brian said. So that's that's obviously extremely important. We also talk about cash flow as a second thing. And obviously that's important, right? We got to pay our bills. And that's usually the one that farmers first, or any of us as we're running a business, that's what hits us first is, do I have the money to pay the bills? But when we talk about cash flow, we also include in their replacement capacity on the farm too. So that we're not just using up that machinery, are we taking into account what we need to be purchasing to stay online? So, and then the last one being net worth change. So, are we building equity over time? And so we really drive back to those three as we're talking with farms all the time. Obviously, there's, lots of different ways of looking at finances underneath all three of those. We've got the 16, approved financial measurements that everybody looks at and tries to compare across farms. But one of the things that we've done with farms in recent years, because there's a lot of recent ±5 again, right, Brian? There's always a lot of talk about, what's my break-even price? What's your cost of production? That type of thing. And it gets confusing because a lot of people put different numbers in there. They're accounting for different costs. So what we like to do is talk about the break-evens around those three big areas. So it's a very easy calculation to share with farms. So, if my net worth change is zero, what price does it take for my farm to be there? And that is my break-even price for net worth. And I can do that for net farm income. I can do that for cash flow and say, okay, what price do I need to achieve to be zero in each one of those areas? Of course, we don't want to just be zero, right? So then it's talking to the farm about, well, what's a reasonable return to equity on your farm? And that's a goal. That's one of those goals that farms should have is, I don't want to just be break even. I certainly don't want to be below break even, but what return on equity should I have for my farm?
Yeah, Stan, that kind of works right into my next question. What are some specific financial measurements that our producers can focus on and actually get some specific goals for? I'll go to Brian first.
Well, Stan hit on it just a minute ago. I think the big thing is the return on equity, return on assets, and if you look at right now a 401k, we're looking at 14%, and from a farm perspective, man, that would be pretty good. So I think you kind of have to base it on the market, and you have to get up folks to understand that, we may not be able to do that 10, 12, but obviously I think a 5 to 8% goal return on equity is reality. And then, another thing you have to factor is the land. And so basically what we had done in the past, and Larry and I discuss this often, Trainal, is how to handle that land situation. And Larry still includes the land as an asset. And basically what we do, what we've been doing is we've been pulling the land asset out because our land values are, they range from $1,000 to $15,000 an acre in value here in the state, depending on where you're at and what type of land you have. So we've basically been pulling the land out from the business perspective and keeping it as a business itself, hoping we'll have a 5% rate of return on the land. And then hopefully from a farm perspective, maybe we can end up with a 3 to 5% rate of return on our regular farm business. And that's mainly what we look at is rate of return on those assets, rate of return on equity. So.
Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's great. As long as you're pulling that land out and it's not a break even, that you've built in a return on that. We're basically enterprising the farm, which is, if we can get a farm to the point where they're actually enterprising their analysis. So looking at, for instance, dairy, and Brian I are going to use way too many dairy examples here. But okay, so beef cattle, right? So you can pull out the cow calf enterprise, away from the away from the land. You could even break out the backgrounding away from the cow calf. You can, and then you can have your finishing enterprise. And, what am I trying to get? What kind of rate of return am I trying to get from each one of those? And I think one of the important considerations for anybody listening, because we're, just going to be getting into 2021 analysis here soon. And we're looking back at 2020, and you got to pull out those government payments. Just throw that in there in case we don't get back to it, because that's 3 to 4, 5% on some farms of their return on equity or return on assets is government payments. So it took farms that were underwater to showing a 4% return. You can feel good about that for that 1 year, but realize that we've got some work to do if that's where you were at in 2020.
Right, and to build on that, fortunately, the PPPs will not be taxable income this year. So if you receive PPP monies, that'll be non-taxable. But all those CFAP payments, those DMC payments, and they were good. I mean, it was a good year in 2021 from that standpoint.
Yep.
So there's some tax things we got to talk about too later on, and how to manage those profits as well.
Yeah, maybe to shift gears here a little bit. 2022 is really going to be a challenging year for some of our farms, just basically because of inflation and rising costs of some of our inputs, especially fertilizer and fuel. Maybe I'll go with Stan first. What are your thoughts on that? What can producers do about these rising costs of inputs?
Yeah, I think we'll lock in opportunities when you can, and I know that's easier said than done. I've been out working with doing some tax estimates end of December with farms, and they can't oftentimes even get a price from their supplier because the supplier doesn't have the product yet. But where there are opportunities, we need to look for those opportunities. One of my beef educators that I work with quite a bit here in Michigan, has said, for most cow-calf operations, that's where the money's made, is what am I spending on my input costs? And so looking for alternatives to feed supplies, looking at maybe a different way of doing a particular part of your business, really looking at, all of those input costs. What if I can't lock it in, what can I do differently? What's a different way of looking at this input costs? Of course, that starts out with, of course, knowing your own costs of production. So looking at those different costs for your farm on a per production unit basis, whether that's a per cow or per hundredweight of milk or per acre of land, and then comparing yourself with some system. So that's getting feedback from Brian and his colleagues on that are using their system. It could be going into FinBin, so anybody can go in. There's no charge to go into Minnesota's FinBin program, which is where all our numbers get shuffled to, and they can do a sort on a dairy enterprise or do a sort on a beef enterprise and start looking at, well, where is my labor, per hundredweight of milk, or where is my labor per cow unit? How do I compare with others, that are, and you can say, compare me to high profit versus the average. Hopefully we're not comparing ourselves to the average. If we're setting goals, we're comparing ourselves to that top 20% and saying, how do I get there?
Brian, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Oh boy. If you all would have listened, I don't know, maybe you did, Ed Rayburn, Dr. Ed had sent out a list of 10 things that could be done, and mainly dealing with fertilizer prices and how to combat those. And that was derived from Chris Teutsch at UK. That was specifically on fertilizer prices, but I think it doesn't really matter. I think it fits right in with everything that we do from an increase in cost, not just fertilizer itself. I think there's management changes that we can make. Basically what I did was I took those things, those 10 topics from Dr. Teutsch and flipped them around a little bit, and maybe put 2 cents in that I had. But some of those things that we could look at, and I think we're a little bit different than some areas, which is positive from a West Virginia standpoint, is we've got grass and we're not solely devoted from a crop standpoint. I think the main thing we can do is do a better job grazing. And with rotational grazing, we know we can increase production by 30% right off the bat if we try to implement that. And if we get into rotational grazing, probably if we're already there, then the next step we do is management intensive grazing, and we move cows more often, with the whole goal of feeding less in the wintertime. And we know there's a direct correlation with the number of bales you feed from a beef cattle standpoint, the number of bales you feed versus profitability. And so it's pretty easy that the more hay we're going to feed is more it's going to cost us. And so if we go into this thing with the mindset of, hey, let's try to get really focused on implementing a good grazing system, I think that's number one and the most important thing that we can do from a management standpoint to affect those input costs. That's number one. Some other things we had, obviously, right now is a really good time to be feeding hay back on those hay fields. Fertilizer costs that I have run, it's probably a little more expensive than some areas because everything we have, we got to get it trucked in here. We're looking at between 180, maybe 160 to 100 to $200 an acre to get our fertilizer put on of what we would be pulling off from a crop removal standpoint. And so we're looking at about $35 to $40 a bale just in fertility cost on a per bale basis. And so that leads you to the next question. The next question is, do we buy hay? There's a lot of guys out there that don't know their production cost on hay. And so if you can buy hay for $40 delivered, a 4 to 5 round bale that's got 750 pounds of dry matter in it, you're better off sitting on the couch watching TV than you are out there making hay. So you got to evaluate that and look at what those costs are. I am seriously, from my standpoint, from a beef cow standpoint, we are seriously considering that this year of not making any hay and purchasing hay in. Obviously, we'll do some hay tests and see if we needed to supplement a little bit, because we do have a fall calving herd as opposed to a spring calving herd. So those energy requirements are a little higher for those cows during the winter. So, but that's one thing we're considering. Another thing is soil testing is going to be incredibly important. Take a look at P&K levels in our state. I think if you're in that medium range, and you are going to have to put down some fertilizer, if you're in the medium range, just go with running some nitrogen UAN solution. I think that's an option. We're probably looking at about $1, $1.10, $1.15 a unit on nitrogen. So you're looking at 60 to 70 bucks an acre just in nitrogen cost alone with that. So another thing from a soil test standpoint, make sure pHs are in good shape this year. Lime, if you're having an issue with a decreased pH, then obviously pH is going to affect uptake of your P and K and your other needed macronutrients. And so I would definitely take a look at those soil samples and really analyze those this year. Add legumes. It's another thing. We're going to increase production, both from a forage standpoint. We're going to increase livestock gain with those. We're going to decrease any fescue issues. I don't know if Stan's got fescue up there, but boy, it's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. So that's going to help with that as well. So frost seeding, getting legumes in. I had on my top 10 list is attend a grazing school. Get out there, get to a grazing school. We're going to have some of those in the state this year. We had a couple last year. So, make sure your producers are aware of those and get them active and focused and interested in trying to get into some management intensive grazing systems. So avoid gimmicks. That's another one.
Avoid giving.
I,
No liquid fertilized miracle
oh
cure,
my
right?
God. Yeah. Avoid the gimmicks, the liquid lime and all that jazz. So, anyway, but yeah, those are some 2 cents from me.
Brian,
Yeah,
as I was listening to you go through that list, I was thinking the same could be said to horticulture producers in our state too. I mean, going back to sustainable practices, focusing on your soils and building up those nutrients in the soils and putting things back that you already have, like, composting, using cover crops, those type of things are going to add money in your pocket and keep the cost of production down for those horticulture operations as well.
Well, I think another thing is we look at this from a challenge standpoint, and yeah, it's obviously fertilizer is an issue, but the good thing that comes out of this is we force ourselves into learning other options and other opportunities that can help us make better producers in the long run too. So
Right. I know maybe this is one of Brian's pet peeves, so I'll start with Stan, but this was on a list of questions that I sent. You know how our producers love equipment, tractors, and all their monuments. But one of the biggest costs for our farms, which I learned from my dad, is machinery repair. So what can we do about this? Or is it, as I guess another part of that, would it be more profitable to hire a lot of custom work done? You're looking at machinery cost. I'll start with Stan on that one.
yeah. I mean, the quick answer is there's probably not one right answer for everybody, right? So, but
Right.
doing a partial budget on that, just as Brian said, looking at hay purchase versus growing it myself. So knowing your cost of production and then saying, okay, what sure most of your listeners are somewhat knowledgeable about costs or doing a partial budget, but basically saying, with this decision X, what's my increased income possibilities? What's my decreased expenses? What's increased expenses? What's decreased income? And I think we have to do that really with those new machinery purchases as well. We ought to be putting together a partial budget on those machinery purchases to say, what is the gain from this? It's not just, hey, it's the end of the year, I should do a 179 deduction on that new tractor for taxes. That's probably not the wisest way to buy machinery. Yeah, it helps with taxes that year, but can get us into a real bad spot too. So I think we need to really take a hard look at those decisions, do it from a business standpoint. What am I going to gain from this new purchase? And then on machinery repairs, I would say my most profitable producers do a lot of off-season maintenance, and that's where the dollars are best spent is we can run old tractors. That's not a problem, but we do have to maintain them. So spending that dollar to save 3 out in the field later with breakdowns and everything else. So really looking then at the combination of that new machinery purchase and machinery repair is what we try to do from a farm financial analysis standpoint, is we have to put both those numbers together and say, okay, how am I doing in this area of my business? Because yeah, we can buy new green every year or new red every year, new blue every year, whatever you prefer. But that's has a cost associated with it, obviously, too. So you can't just look at machinery repair numbers. You have to look at the total.
Hey,
Yeah.
JJ.
Yes.
I'll just say that down here in Greenbrier County this year, a lot of our producers switched over to custom harvester crew that, as far as our silage corn. There was a crew came through and harvested a good bit of what we had here in the valley over the course of a week and a half or so. So a lot of those guys either put it up for sale or just left the equipment in the barn.
Okay.
That's good, Joshua. They can be some real success stories with custom harvesting. You hear about some issues too, with timely harvest or timely planting. So you just have to do your homework, make sure you're going to get somebody that's reliable, that can be held accountable for, getting it off when you need it to go off. So.
Well, and I mean, it is a big chunk of money, and a lot of those producers may not want to let go of it. But when you're talking about harvesting in 2 hours, what it would have took you 4 days to put in the pit, those guys got it done quick and got out of there.
Yep.
Yeah, and before I let Brian chime in about some of our equipment cost, something that Stan hit on. We want to make sure I think that equipment costs can be justified if it's something that you're really going to get a good return on. I mean, if it's a loader tractor that you're going to use every day, or maybe even a four-wheeler or utility type vehicle that's, in and out, it's going to be used every day or 2 or 3 days a week, something that you really need compared to, maybe you at the end of the season, you want to buy a piece of equipment and then you only use it a couple times a year. You may be better off having that custom hired to do that work. What's your thoughts on that, Brian?
I think the big thing you'll have to look at is what we call opportunity cost of owning that piece of equipment. And so opportunity cost is the value of what the interest rate would be if you could stick that money somewhere else. And so for this year, obviously it's going to be higher. And so if you got a tractor out there worth $50,000, I think this year to own that tractor, it's going to cost you $7,000 this year if you're at a 14% return on your assets, just to own it. And so, that's going to vary, but so I think number one, you got to look at that value of that piece of equipment, and if you can get that return out of it versus what that money could be working for you somewhere else, that's the big thing, and that's how you make your determination on that. I tell you, I had I went to the accountant in November, and that was the first time I was actually working ahead this year a little bit. And most of the time I have to react. I ended up paying a bunch of taxes last year. And so I went to the accountant, and, obviously he says, well, go buy equipment. I said, well, that's a horrible idea, because, I'm preaching not to do that. And so, and buying equipment is fine. It's if you can buy a piece of equipment that you're going to utilize and it's not going to depreciate a whole lot. And so, and you need it. That is the main thing, is if you need it, you can't want it, you got to need it. And so I ended up, normally I rent a tub grinder on our dairy because, we're grass-based deal, and, we're a little different. And so we generally will rent a tub grinder, and for about $700 a year. And so I ended up having to buy one this year, and I didn't want to do that, but the guy that I rent them off of wouldn't rent it to me. And so he said, I don't have it, I'm going to have to sell you one. So I bought one for $16,000. And that was like, oh God, that was like driving a stake through my toe or foot, but just because I really didn't want to do that. So, and then I also bought a tractor, but the tractor I bought was a 4230 John Deere, I don't know, 76 model or whatever. And I got lucky, because there is risk involved in that. I got lucky, and so it's a pretty good tractor. I bought that for $10,000. And so that's something that I've put a couple $1,000 into that thing. And so that's something that I don't think, it's not going to depreciate. The thing runs good. If we need to put a motor in it in a few years, that's fine. So, we're not out a bunch of depreciation on that equipment. And so, sometimes you got to do that. Sometimes you kind of got to look at those opportunities, but yeah, the machinery thing is, you got to evaluate. I think the big thing is that opportunity cost, and what could you be doing with that money elsewhere? Josh mentioned some of those guys are leaving it in the barn. If it's going to stay in the barn, and it needs to go somewhere else, because that's just lost potential revenue later on down on the road. So
A lot of overhead sitting there. Yeah. The other thing I think that producers should consider, maybe that we haven't mentioned yet, is what's that neighbor have, and is there some opportunities to do some things together? And I've heard some speakers, dairy farm speakers, crop farm speakers, that have really gotten together and said, okay, let's work together. That could be in volume purchasing for a better price. It could be in sharing machinery. So you don't always have to go out and buy that new piece of machinery if your neighbor's got one that you can work together on, and maybe you purchase one thing and he purchases another thing. So, and maybe there's a third producer and she brings management to the table. So there's some things that we can do together, especially as smaller producers, to build some efficiencies.
I think one thing, that's a good point, that I think one thing that we could start working on from an extension standpoint is to find those groups of folks and work on maybe bringing some of those folks together into groups that maybe meet once a month or once a quarter or something like that, and to build some of those relationships among folks. So
Yep. I started this last year, I started a users group specifically around our accounting programs that we do. So we just get together monthly on a Zoom meeting and talk about, what's happening on your farm, how are you putting stuff in, just that's specifically learning out about a particular software and how to input data and what you're getting out of it. But I think producers really enjoy that kind of interaction and learning from each other. We don't have to be the experts on everything, right? We're learning from them as well, and they're learning from each other. So I think it's a great way to learn.
Yeah, Brandy, we want to get you involved. Do you have some burning questions or topics that you would like Stan or Brian to answer?
Well, I think when Brian talked about, and Stan elaborated a little bit too on the cooperating, and I know Brian's had a experience, and Stan probably has his old county educator days. How do you get farmers to cooperate and really come together? I think Brian kind of touched on it with the relationship building, just getting those folks together, knowing that the folks that naturally are in the same business. I think it helps, but how do you get those producers to see the value in cooperative buying, cooperative, selling, and partnering? And either one of you can address it. And
go ahead, Stan.
Well, it's the wonderful old extension model, Brandy, as long as you made it sound like I was really old, of seeking those groups out, working with them as extension educators, and then sharing those successes with others. I think that's one of our roles, is bringing producers together. Obviously, that's been a different thing over the last couple of years than the way we normally do it. But I think we've been able to figure that out, how to still get groups together. But as we can do things in person, I think that's obviously the ultimate goal there, is to get them together, get them talking, and then sharing those success stories. Obviously, we have to be really careful with confidentiality as we're working with producers. But I've got, and it's not just groups of producers, it could be groups of professionals. So I've got I've got a farm that I'm working with right now that has a regular meeting with advisors, and puts everything on the table. I mean, there's not a bit of non-transparency on that farm. So he and she are willing to put everything out on the table for discussion. I think that's really, really important to have that kind of atmosphere. So if you can get growers to do that, if you can get ag professionals to do that, there's a lot of gain there for farms.
I really like that idea of building trust with the professionals and challenging our producers to think outside of their silos and look at other expertise. So it's good.
I can tell you from experience with that farm is you better, be willing to hear some things you don't want to hear, right?
Have some thick skin, huh?
You should want to hear them, because your goal is to get better, but you're going to hear, hopefully some straight talk from fellow producers or fellow professionals. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, just to build on that point, there's some really good dairy grazing groups out there that meet We don't have any here in our state, but I'm aware of some of those that meet, and just from a financial management standpoint, you know, they actually police themselves, I guess. And that's, you know, they really criticize each other, but they understand that the main goal is to make all of themselves better producers. And so those groups can be really good. We're getting ready to start a grazing group here. I hope that goes okay. We did a grazing school here last year, and so I think some of those folks were interested in trying to meet maybe on a monthly or quarterly basis, and just basically talk about, you know, things they're doing, and things that maybe try to do some farm visits with those folks, and let them kind of make suggestions to each other of what they can do and how they can improve. But the main thing is just to keep that concept going, and the focus of grazing going, and just not to have the grazing school and turn them loose. It's to try to keep the interest building in that. So
Great ideas for sure.
Yeah. Maybe you might talk about a taboo subject sometime. We'll talk a little bit about debt, and I'll start with Brian. How much debt should our farms be carrying? Maybe some benchmarks, and would 2022 be a good year to refinance?
obviously no debt is best, but I'm trying to think about some of that Trans4 data, JJ, that we've got. I think a goal, if I remember right, from a beef cow standpoint, and I don't even know what the dairy debt would be, but I think a goal from a beef cow standpoint would be $500 per cow, if I remember. I'd have to look that up. In debt load. I mean, I've done financials that are at $2,000, $3,000 per cow debt load, but yeah, obviously no debt is best, but I don't know. Stan can probably weigh in on some benchmarks better than I can.
I'll challenge you just a little bit on that, Brian, since we just talked about challenging each other. That if I can make money on my my debt, then I'm
Absolutely.
okay.
Good point.
So we got to look at both return on assets and return on equity, right? Make sure that we're doing good on both those areas. Just to take it to a percentage basis, I guess, to cover more of your listeners. You know, are the financial goals that we use with FinPac are less than 30%. Debt to asset is strong. That's hard. 30 to 60, there's a pretty wide range. That's the caution area. So if I can keep farms in that, you know, hopefully to the better side of that range, you know, it just gets tight to be able to do the cash flow on the farm and to meet those debt obligations if we get too high on that. So but looking at that as you know, I'm borrowing that money and I'm borrowing at you know, 5-6%. Can I get better than that? You know, can I get my return on top of that? If I can, then it's okay. If I can't, you know, then I got to be really careful how much of that I'm putting onto these cows or acres, whatever type of farm we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, JJ. And I'll give you a good example. That is when we bought into our dairy co-op, we had to buy in, I think it was $20,000. And so the option was we also had some other debt load with a bank, and that money was probably at 5 or 6%. But we went ahead and borrowed money from FSA at 3% and bought in. And plus, what was nice was the co-op was paying a 8% return on that money. And so what we borrowed money for 3% and got a 5% return on that. So it ended up working out good. So
that's a good deal.
Yeah, and maybe a two-parter here. I'll start back with Brian. Are there maybe some enterprises that some of our farmers can add to some supplemental income? Or on the flip side of that, are there some things that we can do to save money? Some other ideas?
I think some of the things we've already talked about. you know, at least from our standpoint in our state, as far as the increased grazing. And, you know, I think if you're adding enterprises, you got to evaluate time and the profitability of the potential of that enterprise. You know, that's one thing we often don't have. Brandy made the comment earlier about most of our producers. A lot of our producers are working off the farm. And sometimes we have great ideas like adding a high tunnel, which folks that realize when they add a high tunnel, it's like having a dairy. And so, you know, a lot of those folks will have those things, but don't do a very good job utilizing them. So, you know, I think you really got to evaluate that additional enterprise if you're going to incorporate that as well. So a lot of times I think we're better off just trying to do a better job with what we've got in many of those situations.
And staying where your interests are. I think a lot of producers try to chase the next big thing, and they're not necessarily, you know, aligned with their skill set or their experiences, and there's a learning curve that has a cost associated with it. So I think that's where we just got to caution our producers to stick, not necessarily to have to stay within a box. I mean, definitely be innovators, but look for ways to innovate in things that bring you joy, and also where your comfort zone is, per se.
Well, you said exactly what I was going to say, Brandy. So,
Okay.
because as Brian was talking, I was thinking skill set and you know, what do I like to do? You know, it's so easy to get caught up in the next wave of, you know, this is what everybody's talking about. Maybe I should do that. Well, are you going to enjoy doing that, first of all? And then secondly, do you have the skill set? You know, every enterprise we add on the farm is it's a whole nother, you know, do you have a person that's going to take charge of that part of the business that can make money at that new enterprise? And so, you know, in some cases, yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, most of my fruit producers up here, you know, if they've got a farm market, they would love to run everything through their farm market that they can, because they make the most money on those products that go through there. But I've got, you know, a local cherry grower that's just not his thing. You know, he says, you'll never see me doing that because I don't like to talk to people, you know. So what's your skill set, you know, and are you going to enjoy doing, you know, that thing? If you're not, then yeah, honing down, as Brian said, on what, you know, getting better at what you're doing might be the best answer for you.
And on the flip side of that, we really have to caution our producers that just love to make that hay. They have to pencil it out, because it might be something you really love doing. But like Brian said, you could be sitting at the couch watching your favorite sports team on TV, and that's enjoyable thing.
Yeah.
Watching CNN as Josh would be doing, right?
Well, there you go. Whatever.
It's a balance.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think sometimes, and I've got into that myself, that we, you know, everyone has time restraints, and every extra little enterprise or extra little idea you have maybe has to be financed. You have to have time to manage it, time to implement it. And sometimes we don't have that much time, or our staff, or our labor force on the farm. It's just pushing it to the edge. And then we realize that although it was a good idea for profitability, the implementation part is maybe where we fall short as producers. You agree with that, Brian?
Yep, very much so.
Yep.
Any other, Randy, you have any other questions?
Well, I don't have anything wrote down. I have a lot of notes for evaluation. I just, just thinking about this topic in general, and something that Stan mentioned earlier is the 16 financial topics, goals, or something. Maybe that's something that we need to lay out for our producers. Some basic things like the sovereignty, debt to asset ratios, those kind of things that we want to look at to be better managers in 2022. How can we challenge our producers and us as ag service providers to make the most of this next farming year, and get in a better financial situation under the current, tight conditions that we're going to be seeing?
Yeah, another maybe topic I want to discuss. We were talking about goals for the farm business, financial goals. And also we need to take a look at a balance, especially for maybe having goals for the family. I know that for a farm business, if you work and you farm as well, um, or even full-time farmers, a lot of work, a lot of stress. What are maybe some goals just for the family? I'll start with Stan.
Yeah, I think that's important, Brian or JJ, because if we don't set a goal, it's not a priority, right? And and we get wrapped up in our business. So besides taking the time this time of the year to really focus on your business and where can I sit down and really make some differences this year, as in my off season, which it's for most producers, it's at least a little bit of an off season, right? What can I also be doing, with my family? What's some things that we would like to do this year? Am I going to set some time aside each week to spend time with my spouse, with my kids? What do we want to do together as a family this year? I think those things are important to set ahead at the beginning of the year to plan into our schedule, so that we're maintaining some balance there. It's a family business, colleague, Bob Milligan, retired from Cornell. I do some ag HR stuff, and he reminds us that agriculture is unique, but it's not uniquely unique, is what Bob would say, and that we're a family business, so we can learn from other family businesses around us. Make sure, that we're learning from them, that balance of, family, farm. We all enjoy working on the farm, or else we wouldn't be in it. But yeah, I think setting family goals is really important. And I would certainly set some that are on a weekly basis as well as annual basis for this coming year.
Brian?
I think Stan kind of hit the nail on the head as far as, family time and seeing what you want to try to accomplish during the year, as opposed to just getting out there and working on the farm. But what do you want to do from a family perspective? Do you want to go somewhere from a vacation, get out and do some things as a family? Or one thing that unfortunately I guess it's a good thing too, but I mean, I'm fortunate enough to my dad and I have a lot of discussions about time, and I'm always running here and running there and that kind of thing. And I'm fortunate enough right now that my son has came back to the farm, and the next challenge for us is how are we going to have him make a living? And so of course we're working together, and he's kind of doing a sheep enterprise now, and so, but no, I think setting goals as far as business goals and family goals is of great importance, especially now's a good time to start trying to sit down, and if you are going to treat this thing as a business, which I hope folks tend to do that, is to sit down and try to make some goals for the year. And that's a big step right there. I think it's just sitting down and treating your farm as a business and coming up with some financial goals and family time goals. And so,
Randy, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as Stan and Brian were talking, I was just thinking of my own family operation, and thinking maybe this is right, maybe this is wrong. But when I look at professional development opportunities that I'm going to have throughout the year with my full-time job, I look at how can I incorporate family time in that, whether it's a weekend grazing school and we take an extra couple days and do something with the family while we're already out there traveling. That's a good way to maybe encourage our producers to, once they're off the farm, to incorporate that family time into their planning and just look ahead. I mean, just as Brian and Stan both said, just initiating that discussion is the number one goal I would like to see our producers do. Start talking about what their goals are going to be for this coming year and how they're going to become better managers, and how they're going to make sure they're incorporating a balance into their farm family life.
Yeah, before we go, Stan, I'll start with you. I need to know who your favorite country music artist is.
Oh, well, that's not too hard. George Strait.
Oh,
George
man.
Strait. That's right. He's one of the true cowboys. What's your
Yeah.
favorite George Strait song?
Oh man, now you're gonna pin me. There's there's
On
way too many.
Saddle Gotta be that one, Amarillo.
Say that.
Florence, man.
Yeah, Amarella's pretty good too. Yeah. I mean, the guy had a #1 hit for, I think, more years than anybody, right? So he's great.
Oh, yeah. What about you, Brian?
Good.
Country?
Yeah.
I like country, but I'm also an 80s kind of fan, So the other night I couldn't sleep, so I was on the Roku stick watching 80s videos. Man, that was some awesome stuff there. Got some White Snake and 80. I love the 80s rock and roll, but country wise, I like George Strait. Yeah, stands on that one. There's a guy by the name of Ian Tyson. I don't know if you ever heard of Ian Tyson or not. I would recommend him if you haven't listened to Ian Tyson. He's kind of an old cowboy, never made it real popular, but out in Montana. And so look Ian Tyson up.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah, on the Mountaineer Farm Talk, we stick to country western singers. So take that White Snake back to Monroe County, Brian.
yeah, there's two types of music, Brian: country and western. No, we're just teasing.
I can't imagine why he couldn't sleep at night after listening to that stuff.
I'll every week I'll try to throw out I kind of learned my love for country music kind of came from my dad, and one of his favorites was Roger Miller.
Mm.
So if anybody remembers that, what was his big hit? King of the Road. But all those are still on records. So actually the records LPs are coming back in style. So it's vintage. Before we go, I appreciate Brian and Stan having you on Mountaineer Farm Talk. Before we go, last question: what our producers can do this year to increase profitability, what would that be? And I'll start with Stan.
Well, you froze up there for a minute, so could you repeat that?
Oh, if there's one thing that farmers could do this year to increase profitability, what would be your suggestion, your advice?
Boy, one thing. That's pretty tough. When I look at, I guess set some goals, I guess would be the thing that would cover a broad enough area, because when I look at high profit farms, it's very rarely one thing that puts them at the top of the list. I think the #1 thing that puts them at the top of the list is producing a high quality product that gets them the maximum amount of dollars. I know that's true for dairy, that our top 20% are getting more per hundredweight of milk than the other groups are. And they're doing that by getting all of those premiums, minimizing deductions, and producing a high quality product. So
are they focused on risk management strategies in your experience too, Stan? Is that
Oh, yeah.
something that, when
Absolutely.
you look at profitable?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'd go back to, this time of the year, that's, be the leader on your farm. That's who you are, right? So be the leader, spend the time with that pencil, and really, that's probably, you're going to make the most money this time of the year doing that, compared to the rest of the year is setting out that strategy now and trying to get some controls around that income and cost. So.
Brian, what's your one thing?
Well, I think just specifically from a production standpoint, I'll focus on that. But I think just from that standpoint is intensify grazing. Yep.
Intensify grazing. Brandy, do you have any input on that?
No, I think that our experts here did a fine job of giving our producers and listeners something to really think about and hone in on 2022. So I've learned a lot today.
Good. I agree with Stan. I think that as setting goals is maybe something that we don't focus on, but you don't have any goals, how are you having something to aim for, a target, so to speak? So we'll encourage everyone to set goals for the new year. Again, I appreciate Stan, you coming on, and Brian.
Been a pleasure.
Sure, JJ.
And I just
Enjoyed
wanted to once again, our programs and activities offered by West Virginia University Extension Service are available to all persons without regard to race, color, sex, disability, religion, age, veteran status, political beliefs, sexual orientation, national origin, and marital or family status. So again, thank everyone for tuning in to Mountaineer Farm Talk. We will have this available on YouTube. And next week, we are going to be discussing winter feeding strategies. And then after that, we're going to be talking about farm transition planning. So we have an exciting January lined up. And thanks everyone again for tuning in to Mountaineer Farm Talk.
Thank you, JJ.
Thank you.
See y'all next week.